Welcome to another episode of This Is Why I Don't Vote, a podcast. Your safe space to discuss sports, politics, social issues, and even religion. Where we will take it all very seriously, but not too seriously. The people had themselves some elections on November the 2nd, and we will discuss the results of as much and what I believe is a very positive pattern in the turnover that is our political parties and our politicians in this country today. In addition, one Robert Sarver is in the doghouse. And consistent with the way that the Phoenix Suns have been run for the course of the 17 years he's been owner, well, does it come as much of a surprise to any one of you? Let's roll into episode 36.
Act 1. If you can't see the pattern forming, you will be a victim of it.
As of the recording of this segment of the podcast, the Democrats lost big in the elections on November 2nd, and there is many a lamentation as to why this happened. In addition, on the other side, the Republicans are taking a lot of credit for what they are calling this massive victory. What is interesting is that this is part of a pattern that has been forming in our country for roughly 25 years. You can see this pattern in the way modern elections are now being run, in the way that these candidates are running for office. Candidates no longer stand for anything. They just stand against either A, another candidate, or B, the perception of that other candidate, of the political party, of that political environment. These elections are multi-million-dollar endeavors, as we all know, but there is a machine that is insulating these endeavors such that it can't see or it won't see the patterns that are forming. No election strategist is going to go to their candidate of choice, their party of choice, and say, you need to separate yourself. You need to make yourself identifiable and unique by focusing on the issues, by taking a strong stand on policy, by laying out in detail what you will do when elected. The dirty little secret is that all of these election pollsters, all of these pundits, all of these strategists, they know, look, if you want to win an election in the 21st century, you run against someone. They may not be saying that publicly, but they are saying that privately. You run against Trump or you run for Trump. You evangelize a certain party or a certain person or a certain policy. Or you demonize a certain person, a certain policy, a certain party. No, I didn't say those in the exact same order, but I'm not re-recording this. So how does this really manifest? What do we really see from these candidates? What we see is they talk about another candidate, they talk about another party, they talk about some policy, and it's all vagaries. It's all generalizations. And to the extent that that might have always been the environment, that this isn't a necessarily unique situation, it has gotten more vague and more generalized than it's ever been. Trump said he was going to renegotiate trade deals. Didn't say how he was going to do it. Biden says he's going to tackle the coronavirus. Doesn't say in any capacity, with any specificity or detail, how he's going to do it. And then, for periods of time, candidates just disappear. They don't even have to be front and center in front of a camera anymore. Between the ads on television and the ads on social media, the candidate just sits back and doesn't have to say anything, doesn't have to do anything. To the extent that the candidates are going to appear in public, it's infrequent appearances and it's more of a rally than it is an incident of showing up at a diner, showing up at a business. You know I'm a history guy. It's like we went back in a time machine 100, 120 years ago, and these are calculated barnstorming tours. Selected, scheduled incidents where candidates are going to show up somewhere. People are going to congregate for them, towards them. They aren't going to go to the people. The people are going to come to them. They're going to give their stump speech, and then they're going to get back on the train and go to the next event. Trump revitalized this, but it was not a new phenomenon. The phenomenon occurred 100, 120 years ago because of the limits of transportation, of media. This was how one could communicate to the public, presenting somewhat of a personal aspect. Trump demonstrated that you can run for a national office, that you can run for a statewide office, and you don't have to go around kissing babies. You don't have to make these personal appearances at restaurants or at businesses. As I've stated in other podcasts, it's a copycat league. Politics is just like the NFL. It's a copycat league. Once someone does something successfully, other people are going to adopt it. Joe Biden, for his part, successfully implemented that model in running against Trump. He said very little. He made very few public appearances. To the extent he made policy promises, they were broad, they were vague, they were bland. To the extent that he spoke out about anything, it was to vaguely denounce what had been done by Trump in the past 4 years. These tactics were successful. They were successful for Trump. They were successful for Biden. And they have been employed successfully in these elections in Virginia and New Jersey. This is a pattern that's been forming, again, for decades. And let's go back to when it actually started to appear. When can we identify this new pattern in American politics? The Jimmy Carter presidency was, for all intents and purposes, a disaster. And you had Ronald Reagan come in 1980, and there were 12 years of Republican presidents with some mild changes. The House, for its part, was mostly controlled by Democrats, but the Senate would vacillate back and forth. After a decade of Republican presidencies and Republican policies, Bill Clinton was elected, with the Democrats taking control of both the House and the Senate. So now you have this unification, one party in not only the White House and in Congress, in the House, in the Senate. So now things are going to be able to get done. We're going to be able to put forth these legislative agendas that have been held back for a decade by these nasty Republicans. Having control of not only the White House, but the Congress, the Democrats were so successful in those first 2 years, the years 1992 and 1993, that in 1994, the Democrats, for the first time since the 50s, lost the House. William J. Clinton becomes a lame duck president. Fast forward to George W. Bush. He wins the election. Well, a lot of people think that he didn't, but he wins the election in 2000. He actually has 6 years of Republican-controlled government. He is the president, a Republican president, and the Republicans actually have the House and the Senate. Curiously, over the course of those 6 years, a Republican-controlled government, it is the fastest growth that the federal government has ever experienced in the history of this country. That doesn't sound very Republican now, does it? That doesn't sound very conservative now, does it? That's right, dear listener. I hope the wheel now is starting to spin in your head. Let's fast forward. In 2006, after having control for 6 years and expanding the federal government faster than it had ever been expanded in its history, the Republicans lose both the House and the Senate. George Bush is now a lame duck president. And the unpopularity of that Republican government probably is the springboard for one Barack Obama becoming president of the United States. Now we have the Democrats in control of government. You have a Democrat that's president of the United States and in the White House, and you have a Democratic Congress, a Democratic House, and a Democratic Senate. Now they're going to get things done. Now the Democrats have this opportunity after this oppression of the last 6-8 years. They're going to be able to put forth their legislative agenda. 2 years in the midterm elections, Obama's immediately a lame duck. The Democrats lose the House, and they lose a lot of seats in the Senate. Trump, given this is recent history, many of you know this, Obama ends his administration as a lame duck. Donald Trump is now elected president. Donald Trump inherits a Republican House and a Republican Senate. He's able to get his legislative agenda over, which is basically nothing more than just the tax overhaul. 2 years later, he's a lame duck. Trump loses the House. The Democrats gain seats in the Senate. So here we sit. Biden wins the election against Trump. There's also a turn in the Senate, so now it's a Democratic House and a Democratic Senate. And what have you seen the Democrats do since they were able to wield power uniformly in this government. I look at what's going on and I see the American people reaching out not to politicians, not to a party, but reaching out to government and saying, do something. And I don't mean do one or two things. Don't hang your hat after having power for 2 years. Don't hang your hat on the fact that you did one thing. The world is getting smaller and smaller. The information that is out there in the ethos, via the internet, via social media, this information is getting out more efficiently, and it is, yes, I'm going to say something controversial, but it is, in fact, more accurate than information that we've ever been privy to as a public. If you go to bad sources, you're going to get bad information. But you can actually go and get raw data now. You can get information sourced by real journalists, but better than that, information sourced by your fellow man, things captured in real time, being posted to social media in real time. Both political parties point at one another and they say things to inflame passions, to inflame tensions. But when it comes time to vote on the reconciliation of an appropriation to the Pentagon for the military budget, there's nary a vote in opposition. These bills fly through not only the House, but the Senate, and then are signed by whichever president. The point is, there is political will to get things done. It's just not to get things done for what you want to get done. And therein lies the pattern. Therein lies why you're seeing this vacillation between political parties, why you're seeing so quickly people wanting to turn over their politicians. I don't think this is a bad thing. I think this is a good thing. That's how our system works. If you're not getting what you want out of your elected official, then vote him out of office. And as I have said in previous podcasts, there is really little difference between the Republican Party and the Democratic Party in the 21st century. There is very little difference between any Republican elected official and any Democratic elected official. When they get into office, they are going to do the exact same things. As we become more sophisticated as a population, as we become more sophisticated in a voting public, I think you're going to see more and more voters qualify themselves as independent. This is a natural reaction and evolution of the sophisticated voter understanding that neither political party really stands for anything. They really only stand in opposition to one another. All they can do is accuse the other of having some sort of detrimental policy, detrimental belief, taking detrimental action to the country. They aren't going to solve problems. They aren't going to create. All they're going to do is put a stop to the nemesis that is the other person, that is the other party. Perhaps it's always been this way. Or perhaps it becomes like this over ebbs and flows in our political process. Perhaps this is just one of those times where we don't have any leadership. And when we get one or two or three actual leaders come into the political landscape, those people will then become icons similar to the Lincolns or the Roosevelts. For now, we have a bunch of petty assholes who are going to come in and out of government, and unlike in decades past, we're going to cycle through them. And to the extent that we don't, to the extent that we continue to re-elect people that do nothing more than criticize another politician or another party or someone else's policy, then it's on us. Then the fact that nothing is going to get done, that's on us. That has nothing to do with these politicians. I think the results on Tuesday, November the 2nd, 2021, these are nothing more than the result of Democrats not getting anything done in their first year of power. Republicans can beat their chest, but this is exactly what happened to them 2 years into the Trump presidency. This is the canary in the coal mine. This is the litmus test. Are you doing a good job according to the American people? Are these legislators, are these politicians actually passing legislation consistent with the demands of the American people? If the answer is no, and they all get turned over, that's a good thing. And to the extent that we want to look at politics like we do sports, where we want to see pundits comment on things, it's a waste of time. Rooting for politicians or political parties is a waste of time. Neither party is substantially different from the other. Neither politician is substantially different from the other, and we're not getting anything out of either consistent with what we desire. Let's turn them over. You see some pundit commenting on politician A versus politician B, it's all nonsense. Politician A isn't the winner, politician B isn't the loser. Politician A is only in that office long enough that that politician can prove I was no different than politician B in the first place, and then politician C running against politician A in 2, 4, 6 years, well, they're going to win the election. And politician C isn't any better than politician A. Politician C isn't the winner. Politician A isn't the loser. Don't let any pundit mislead you. See it for what it is, dear listener. See it for what it is. Sitting in office, the candidate that you love or the candidate that you hate, they're substantially the same. They are doing substantially the same things. They are going to vote for substantially the same things, and that's what's most important. And you, dear listener, me, dear listener, we should turn these people over. We should just chew them up and spit them out. Treat these politicians like you would treat an airline or a credit card company. It isn't 1956 anymore, dear listener. You don't have loyalty to a credit card company, do you? You don't have loyalty to a bank. You don't have loyalty to an airline. Why? Because you know they have no loyalty to you. You are now a savvier consumer. You are no longer taking in brand awareness and loyalty as part of your consideration on who you do business with. It's, what am I getting? Is this the best deal that I can get? Most of these companies are the same. They do not care about me as an individual. They do not care about my dreams, my goals. Am I getting the best business deal that I can? That's the way it should be. You're a much savvier consumer now. That's the way we should consume politics, but most specifically, politicians. We'll give you a chance. We'll try you out. If you're going to do the same thing that your brethren have been doing for the last 25, 30 years, your ass is out on the tiles. That certainly doesn't mean that the person that beat you in the election is somehow a winner, and it certainly doesn't mean that we are now embracing a party.
Act 2. This story about the Suns and Sarver doesn't surprise me.
I grew up on the East Coast. I am a fan of a number of big market teams in sports, big market teams that get not only big market media attention, but big market media scrutiny. And I have a number of acquaintances, friends, colleagues that have grown up in the same area that follow a number of big market teams. Many of those people have either lived in or have visited Phoenix, Arizona, and are aware that Robert Sarver and the Phoenix Suns are one of the most dysfunctional, mismanaged National Basketball Association teams in the league. And Robert Sarver, really, he is the equal of one James Dolan of the New York Knicks when it comes to management buffoonery. Sarver has routinely meddled in the team, and this was well known for years. Routinely meddled in the team, made terrible decisions about draft picks, about trades. But for the fact that Phoenix, Arizona was in Phoenix, Arizona, was west of the Mississippi River, was in what all the East Coasters would call a remote time zone, Robert Sarver would be the equal of one James Dolan in media coverage, in scrutiny, in what the kids call today the memes. Although I've lived in the Valley for years, I've never really been a huge Suns fan, although I haven't really held anything against them. I am, though, a very passionate basketball fan. One of the basketball teams that I follow is the University of Tennessee Volunteers. As I have stated in podcasts prior, I am a graduate of the University of Tennessee. The University of Tennessee Volunteers play as part of their yearly schedule one University of Kentucky Wildcats, a basketball team that is heralded in college basketball. It is a blue blood of college basketball. Follow along here, dear listener. Let me take you down memory lane. It will all come together very quickly. University of Tennessee basketball considers itself a rival of the University of Kentucky basketball team, and although as a fan I like to believe that to be true, and I believe that this rivalry exists, it has been for many years a big brother, little brother type rivalry. Unfortunately, the University of Kentucky recruits kids who are literally there to play 1 year, maybe 2 years, and then go to the NBA draft. They have a coach that seems to bring those kids along very quickly. They are an extremely difficult team to beat year in and year out, and there is often little of a rivalry. One such player that attended the University of Kentucky for but 1 year was a young man named Devin Booker. Have you heard, dear listener, of Devin Booker? I believe that you have. Devin Booker would take ground ball and he would throw it at hoop and it would go into hoop. Devin Booker would take ground ball and he would dunk it. Devin Booker would lay the ball up off the glass, off of the backboard of the rim, and it appeared to me that no matter where it caromed, that ball would go into the basket. Naturally, when Tennessee plays Kentucky, it is especially sweet when Tennessee can beat Kentucky. It is especially sour when Kentucky gets one of those, and they get them routinely, unfortunately, phenoms that you know is only going to be in college basketball for a year. They get one of these phenoms, he takes the court, and he makes stupid shots over the course of 40 minutes to once again fell the University of Tennessee Volunteers on behalf of the University of Kentucky Wildcats. In the year of our Lord, 2014-2015, that season that spans from the fall of 2014 into the spring of 2015, Devin Booker was one of many, unfortunately, McDonald's All-Americans who were on this University of Kentucky basketball team. Devin Booker against the University of Tennessee, in Knoxville, took ball and put it in basket numerous times. It was very disappointing. As a freshman, he led all Kentucky Wildcats in scoring against Tennessee. I remember saying to myself, I do not like Devin Booker. I do not like him, Sam I am. Yes, the University of Kentucky won that basketball game. Devin Booker, for his part, went on to play very well for the rest of the season into the NCAA tournament. He decides to come out, right, as a freshman. He decides to come out into the draft, the 2015 draft. He is the 13th pick by one Phoenix Suns. In the year of our Lord, 2015, I said, perfect. They are going to chew him up and spit him out in 3 or 4 seasons. His career will only flourish once he gets to another team, if it actually flourishes at all. Now, you may be thinking, dear listener, wow, you are a petty bastard. Yes, I am. Yes, I am. I'm not proud of it. I'm admitting to you that this player who, once again, as a member of this monolith, this Goliath that was the University of Kentucky basketball team, once again felled the University of Tennessee basketball team. Once he went into the draft, I thought to myself, the Phoenix Suns, huh? You're going to go and die in a fire. The team is an absolute shit show. The owner is a jackass and has only escaped the type of scrutiny that one James Dolan for the New York Knicks would get, but for the fact that he's in the desert, that he's in Phoenix, Arizona, in what the East Coasters would call a remote time zone. Booker will only know pain, misery, heartache, and failure. And, to be accurate, up and until this past season, that is all he knew. These Suns teams were losing 60, 65 games a year, as was commonplace in the desert for the close to 2 decades that Robert Sarver owned the team. Management in and out. Coaching staff in and out. When you see this type of dysfunction in an organization, it usually stems from the owner thinking that they are smarter than they actually are. We can certainly say this of James Dolan. We can certainly say this of the New York Knickerbockers. This is a man who thinks he is smarter than he is, and it has been to the detriment of that basketball team. Not only in the management of the team, but the personnel that's actually under contract, in the way that they play basketball. It's a shit show. Now, I have an admission to make to you, dear listener, after this revelation. As a resident of the Valley, watching this team, I personally attended some of their basketball games. I watched them on the television set. This was not a hard team to root for. The kids were trying. They had talent. Booker, for his part, was a budding NBA superstar. In interviews, he seemed like an earnest, hard-working NBA player that was getting beaten down by all the losing and wanted to do anything that he could to help lift the team and his teammates out of these dire circumstances. As is common with the Phoenix Suns, entire turnover of the staff. New general manager, new coach, enter Chris Paul. Team that is easy to root for actually starts to win, actually starts to enjoy success. So living here in the Valley of the Sun, seeing the Suns perform so well with so many new faces, it was quite refreshing. But seeing this story that was published by ESPN, today is November 4th, I believe it was actually published today, seeing this story in ESPN, I was not surprised. Harken back, dear listener. Harken back to the segment I did on one Danny Boy Snyder, the owner of the Washington football team in the National Football League. And harken back to the comment that I made, if Dan Snyder were accused of being in some cult that sacrificed dogs to the altar of greed, to the altar of corporate profits, would you be surprised? No, of course not. You fully expect there is no depth to what Dan Snyder can be accused of that you wouldn't believe after everything that's come out about his tenure owning the Washington football team. Now, many of the media stories that I've seen, it's focusing on the misogyny and it's focusing on these racist comments made by Sarver. I'm actually not going to comment specifically about that, but I do believe that these accusations have credence, have credibility based on all of the other content that was in the story. Sarver coming into the locker room, coming into coaches' meetings, throwing temper tantrums about the team's performance. Sarver, a man who clearly knows nothing about basketball, particularly NBA basketball, so much so that he has a reputation for being a buffoon and not knowing anything about NBA basketball, coming in and drawing up plays during practices, after games, in coaches' meetings. Does this seem plausible to you? Based on what you know of this team over the course of the last 17 years under his stewardship? Of course. In that frustration, in that vibration of failure and frustration, yet wanting to be acknowledged for who he is, what his role is in the organization. Do I think a possible outcome is he may have said something misogynistic? He may have done something misogynistic. Do I think it a possible outcome that he said something racist, that he did something racist? Yes, I think it is a possible outcome. The two parts of the story that I really want to comment about, the way he approached, the way Sarver approached the investigation by using an outside law firm, and then the North Korea element. The fact that he's a Kim Jong-un, he's a Kim Jong-il, that all of the staff, all of the employees have to be viscerally, vocally, in their words, in their actions, demonstrating to the public, to the world, that they are so happy to be a member of the Phoenix Suns, to be affiliated with the organization, to be a part of Robert Sarver's family. So let's start with the investigation and the response by Sarver through this law firm. First and foremost, this was an absolutely terrible way to address this investigation from a public relations standpoint, from a public perception standpoint. As much as you might despise Donald Sterling, he was not an idiot when he saw that boiling water was coming up over his head. He knew when he had created so many problems that it could actually compromise his ownership of the basketball team that he had to get out in front and be the face of the LA Clippers in a positive, reassuring way. Although he probably hated to do it and had to have hours and hours of coaching and practice, Sterling agreed to sit down with ESPN and do an interview with relation to investigations about his stewardship of the LA Clippers. If you go back and look at those interviews, he actually does quite well. Sterling, and most likely his public relations team, understood that when there are allegations of racism in a predominantly black sport, when there are allegations of sexism and misogyny in a sport that's trying to reach out to more female viewers, that is pushing the Women's National Basketball Association product to more and more viewers, you have to get in front of that in a personal way. You have to stand in front of people and say, all of this is nonsense. Sarver, for his part, and consistent with the way he's run the Suns for the course of the last 16, 17 years, he decides to outsource this not to a public relations firm, not to people who are adept in dealing with the media. He outsources it to a law firm. He decides, his principals decide, his team decides, let's address our response through a law firm. Dear listener, look at the situation and assess it from your gut. What does it look like when someone accused of something in this type of high-profile position, in this type of situation? What does it look like when instead of addressing it personally himself, when instead of even referring it out to a public relations firm, which would have been somewhat questionable in and of itself, this man, his team, Sarver decides to refer it to a law firm? It looks to me like it looks to you, like it looks to the rest of the public. You're guilty. Whatever you are being accused of, you are guilty. That is why you lawyered up. Then this response, this written response from this law firm. You want to talk about doubling down on bad optics. In response to a question by ESPN, the Suns, through this law firm, in addressing their lack of racial diversity in the front office, state the Suns and Mercury employ black people at more than 3 times the rate of their demographic representation in Maricopa County. Dear God! Only someone like Sarver, so far removed from the public sphere, and my God, only a law firm would put that into writing, thinking that was not only a credible, not only a factual response, but was some sort of clever, sly retort. Now, it may not dawn on you, dear listener, because I know many of you are actually east of the Mississippi River. But let's talk about Maricopa County. Maricopa County is like LA County. It's one of the largest counties in the United States of America. And this is not some rural county like in Oregon or Montana that's just a huge sparse of land. This is like LA County. There is city from one corner of the county to the other corner of the county. The entire city of Phoenix, which many of you have been to, and even if you've just visited, you realize this is a sprawling city. It is still all inside of one Maricopa County. In addition, there is not a huge black population in the city of Phoenix. Now, I haven't seen this really dwelled upon by the Twitterverse, by the social media pundits, but I imagine that it's going to be part of the fodder of what's being discussed in this critique, if not criticism, of the written response to the investigation by this law firm. Just making the claim in and of itself that you employ more of any racial minority that is represented as a demographic within a city, within an urban area, it just doesn't sound good. Again, this is lawyers thinking that they're being clever versus being clever. You would not get any public relations firm who would put something like this into writing, or if they did, they certainly wouldn't be in business for long. It's one of those terms, it's one of those arguments that really is making no argument at all. It reminds me of the episode of The Office where Dwight is taking over as manager in one of the many opportunities, one of the many episodes where he does, and he's giving out Shroot Bucks as a reward for people who are doing things consistent with his edicts. And Stanley is not buying into the reward system for Shroot Bucks and famously says, "I'll give you 1,000 Stanley nickels if you let me out of this meeting." And Dwight says, "How many Stanley nickels are in a Shroot Buck?" And Stanley's retort is, "It's the same ratio of unicorns to leprechauns." Making an equivalence that has no real basis in any fact. And to the extent that it does, who can confirm as much? To recap, Sarver makes mistake not going on camera to refute all these allegations. Sarver makes mistake not referring this out to a public relations firm to address on his behalf. And my God, Sarver makes mistake lawyering up and actually approving a letter that in his lawyering up makes asinine assertions as a proxy for a quip or a clever retort. In reviewing this story, it just jumped out at me. This is the Sarver tenure as owner of the Suns. Every single bit of it. And the icing on that cake, the cherry on top of the sundae, is the demand that in their atrocity, not mediocrity, in their atrocity, Sarver demands of the coaching staff during the games to be jumping up and down and cheering like cheerleaders. And here I have to address my second point. When I read that line in the story, I knew that there had been a meme about this years before, the Phoenix coaching staff trying to celebrate and it being a complete debacle. But I didn't know that it was actually being orchestrated from Sarver himself as less a request and more a demand where disobedience would compromise your job security. That reminds me of Donald Sterling and the LA Clippers. Things that he would require of people who work for him that were so far outside the pale of a professional organization that you wondered how he was able to stay in a position of power for as long as he did. This is literally having North Korea style, you best praise the leader at all times type tactics. Demonstrate to me in my presence or publicly that you couldn't be happier being a part of this organization, or I'm going to shoot you with an anti-aircraft gun. Do you believe it to be true, dear listener? Take all of the racism out of it. Take all of the misogyny out of it. Do you believe that Robert Sarver would demand of his employees such loyalty, such demonstrations of loyalty, particularly in public, that they would have to cheerlead in the middle of a game when the team is 16-59 and they're getting their asses kicked? I believe it. I believe that it is factually accurate. I believe that is something that Sarver would do. I believe that is who Sarver is, and therefore it gives credence to some of these other allegations specific to racism, specific to misogyny. How can I say that? How can I say that these other allegations of petty behavior, of this power-hungry behavior, How would the veracity of these allegations indicate, perhaps, racist comments, sexist or misogynistic comments? In really reflecting on this story, I asked myself, what would inspire these types of men, the Donald Sterlings of the world, the Sarvers of the world? What would inspire them to do any of the things that they were doing? And the story actually comments on this. It's about power. It's a power dynamic. And if you look at what Sarver is being accused of, the power dynamic is interesting because here's a man with all the money in the world, with all the power in the world, with a high public profile, and yet he acts like a petty, insecure tyrant. I do not sit here to diminish the force and effect of any of his racist comments or any of his sexist comments. I am not a racial minority. I am not a woman. So I can't really speak to how it feels to be put in that position by someone in a seat of power, like a Robert Sarver. But to the extent that these things were being done by Sarver, it speaks to the actions of a petty, insecure man. Not simply the racism, not simply the sexism, all of it. It's all part and parcel. I can believe the racism, the sexism, these things actually occurred because I believe that they stem from the same source, the same origin, the same vibration by which this man would go to his coaching staff and demand of them, cheer, or I'm going to shoot you with an anti-aircraft gun. In the past, I would ask you, dear listener, to think about it. Now I ask you to feel into it. Think about it, but feel into it. Feel into the situations that you had to be submissive, subservient to someone that had power over you and the actions that that person would take. What did Abraham Lincoln say? If you want to test a man's character, don't give him adversity, give him power. Many people, when given power, will become drunk with it and will demonstrate their worst characteristics, namely their pettiness, namely their insecurity. If Robert Sarver felt challenged because he is such a petty man, he would then resort to the easiest, right? The easiest method to maintain his power in those situations. An easy way to set yourself apart, an easy way to show that you are superior and that this other person is inferior is to do what? To challenge, if not demean them on their gender, to challenge, if not demean them on their race. Those are the actions of a petty man. Those are the actions of an insecure man. Now, it is very possible that these allegations are not true. It is also very possible that these allegations have been blown out of proportion, that there is some truth to them, but that it has been blown out of proportion by third parties. I believe whatever investigation actually stems from this report, whether the NBA begins an investigation, whether similar to what happened with the Washington football team and Dan Snyder, there's an internal investigation, the authenticity of this story is going to be verified. My point to you, dear listener, is look at the circumstances in their totality. Don't look at any individual accusation. Look at the circumstances in their totality. I personally feel that these things are consistent with the way this team, the Phoenix Suns, have been run by their owner, Robert Sarver, for 17 years. This is a very interesting story at a very interesting time. Considering that if any of these allegations are true, what is going to be the appropriate action under this new paradigm from the league? This is a league that supported players kneeling during the national anthem. This is a league that is saying our players matter. Their voices matter. If this is all true, is this going to be a Donald Sterling situation? Are you going to see the league and specifically the other owners put pressure to boot Sarver? It has to be a consideration, correct? It has to be a possibility. Sarver is a majority owner. He is not the only owner of the Phoenix Suns. Will the other owners trigger some sort of clause in his contract whereby this type of conduct, racism, misogyny, sexism, is egregious to the point where they can oust him? In the immediate future, how is this going to impact the Suns' ability to attract free agents, to attract staff, coaching staff, executive personnel, when it has been alleged that this is the type of environment that they're walking into? I don't know if these allegations are all true or false, but I do know again that Robert Sarver has been one of the biggest buffoons in managing this team for the course of his 17 years as steward, as owner. I know that by way of public perception, hiring a law firm to respond to a story like this is absolute buffoonery in and of itself. You don't lawyer up in this situation. You come out face forward and you deny it. And finally, my God, is he the dear leader in the Western Hemisphere? Even if the allegations of racism, misogyny, sexism are not true, do you want to go and have to be a public cheerleader at all times, praising one Robert Sarver, professing fealty to one Robert Sarver? And having said all that, let's circle back to the fact that this is still a very good basketball team. This is still a very watchable basketball team. In my enlightened state, I can admit I actively root for Devin Booker. I root for the team to be successful. They are coming together, young kids, as a team. You're watching them mature in your presence. I don't know how this investigation is going to end. I can't imagine that it's going to end well for one Robert Sarver, but I actually now hope that it does not impact the product on the basketball court. I hope it does not impact the development of this team, of these players, Devin Booker in particular. Yes, graduate of the University of Tennessee, a Tennessee basketball diehard, is rooting for one Devin Booker. God help us all. This is Why I Don't Vote, a podcast.